Hi guys, I'm back. This is part 2. Hopefully we can get through the rest of the PowerPoint in this next section. So let's start off with looking at the executive office. So we already talked about the role of the vice president, the last lecture, and the role of the cabinet. And we'll talk about cabinet role more in class. The executive office is another part of the executive branch that you guys need to be aware of. And so if you look at this chart here, you can see that you've got the president, the White House office, the office of the vice president, and all of these different groups that fall under the role of the president. So here you'll see the OMB, the NSC, the CEA, the Office of Policy Development, Office of Administration. Three principal groups are the NSC, the CEA, and the OMB. And so we will be looking at those in more detail in class. Those may be things that you can look up on your own time as well. They talk about those in your book. But there are three principal groups that I just don't have time to cover in lecture, and so you will need to look those up on your own, or we'll be talking about them in class too. But the executive office is going to be these things, and so it's a little bit different than the executive branch and the cabinet, role of the vice president, which are all housed under the executive branch, as well as this part of the executive office. So let's also talk about the White House staff. So White House staff are going to be people that are the president's closest advisors. Oftentimes, these are people that have worked on the campaign with the president, especially during the first year and possibly the first 4 years. Usually there's some change that happens over time. If you look at this picture right here, this is an early picture that was taken, and already you have Flynn, Spicer, and Bannon, who all are gone now, but who were top advisors and part of the White House staff for President Trump. And so he's had a lot of turnover in the White House. And if we get a chance to watch more West Wing episodes, or if you watch some of them on your own, you will find out that all those characters that we've met in the show, they all worked on the campaign and were close to the president, some of them, during the campaign as well. And so these are going to be people that are chosen on their basis of loyalty to the president. Kellyanne Conway, you guys see her speaking for the president all the time on the weekend talk shows. And so these are the people that have the president's ear. They're very close to the president. They're very influential with the president. They can be. And they don't have to be confirmed because their role is to serve the president. And so it's different than like Secretary of State, in which that position is dealing with foreign policy of the United States. There may be foreign policy advisors that are in the White House staff, but they're not directly implementing these policies that you would see, say, in the Secretary of State role. So again, they're the most loyal to the president. They're closest to the president. They don't have to be confirmed. And then we have the role of First Lady. So there's no official government position, but First Ladies determine their role that they want to have, and it really varies. And it used to be very traditional, of course. In fact, originally, First Ladies really weren't considered much at all. And that really kind of changed with, Jackie Kennedy was famous for revamping the White House and bringing the public in the first time that, we really got to see Camelot, is kind of what people called JFK and Jackie's marriage, and their two beautiful small children, and they lived in the White House, and cameras got to go in, and so the American public got to really see that. And so she really kind of fulfilled the role of like welcoming the public and being kind of this this face that could connect to a lot of people's emotions and that sort of thing. There have been First Ladies that have taken on a wide role of activities. Laura Bush, who is wife to George W. Bush. She used to be a librarian, so her focus was reading. Michelle Obama, you guys will be more familiar with, and hers was eating healthy. So a lot of the results of what you see in the school as far as your food choices from the vending machines and school lunch and stuff has a lot to do with Michelle Obama saying we need to eat healthier, we need to have healthier choices. Melania Trump, we're not really sure. So on the campaign and after after President Trump was elected, her issue, it seemed like it was going to be cyberbullying. But now we're thinking maybe it will be the opioid issue and drug addiction. So from what I could tell when I recorded this, it's not really clear what her focus is going to be. So we know that the president, as chief legislator, has veto power, and we've talked before about the different types of vetoes that the president can have. Another thing that the president can do is called a signing statement. So a signing statement is something that the president issues upon signing a bill, and it states some objectives to some of the provisions in the bill. This is not provided for in the Constitution, so there's nothing in there that says the president has to do this. But it's something that presidents have been doing more and more. George W. Bush increased their use. Obama has continued this trend. And sometimes it's if policies are passed, especially by a Congress that isn't necessarily the same party as a president, and a president may not like all aspects of a bill, so maybe the president's going to be a little passive-aggressive and say, I don't really intend on implementing these sections of this bill, or I think these things should be changed, but the president still signs it into law. Richard Nixon is famous for a signing statement that he created on a bill that lowered the voting age to 18. And he said, I think this is what we need to do. If you are able to fight for our country and die for our country, you should be able to vote. And he said, but I know this is going to take a constitutional amendment to do this. And I'm going to go ahead and sign this law because I think it's the right thing to do, but we're probably going to have to have an amendment, and they did have to do that. So these signing statements are kind of these written messages that presidents can add to a bill. Another thing that presidents have to deal with is this idea of a mandate. So this is the idea that voters strongly support the president's leadership and policies, and therefore the president can say, I have a mandate of the people, and therefore that justifies my actions. So let's say that the president has incredibly high approval ratings. Maybe the president just got elected into office by a majority in both electoral college and the popular vote. And so, but Congress is the opposite political party. And the president campaigned on certain items, like be it healthcare or environmental stuff or business or whatever. And the president's really struggling getting policies passed with Congress. So maybe the president says, well, I'm going to create these executive orders then, and you may not like them, but I have a mandate of the people. The people just voted me into office. I have an 85% approval rating. I'm good to go. So the president can justify his or her actions sometimes by saying that they have a mandate. Now, oftentimes the presidents just claim this. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And so, for example, it's arguable that President Trump had a mandate when he was elected into office, and I know that's kind of a controversial thing to say. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but if you think about it, President Trump won the Electoral College, true, but the president lost the popular vote by a lot of votes. And so does President Trump truly have a mandate of the people to implement the policies that he wants to implement? That is, questionable. Obama, when he was elected into office and won the popular vote and the Electoral College, said, I have a mandate from the people to deal with health care. We're going to push through the Affordable Care Act. And then he won his second term, which he says, yes, that's a mandate for the Affordable Health Care Act, essentially. And so therefore it justifies us creating it. So this is something, mandates are something that are really kind of controversial. I don't know that you can absolutely say, yes, they have a mandate, or no, they don't. It's something where you look at a wide variety of variables, polling data, votes, all that sort of stuff to see if a president truly has a mandate or not. One of the other powers that the president has is just going public. And public support can be perhaps the greatest source of influence that the president has. This is something that I've been, in some of the podcasts and shows that I've been listening to, a lot of political pundits say that Trump really hasn't done a whole lot of this to get the Republican health care bills passed, and even the tax bill. So, when President Obama was trying to drum up support for the ACA, he went everywhere. He went all over the country and talked about the ACA and how people needed this healthcare and how great it was going to be. And Trump tweets about stuff and he talks about stuff, but he wasn't 100% on board with the healthcare things. And you wonder about how he feels with the taxes. He says it's great and everything, but he hasn't been out and about campaigning about it. So, once he comes back into the country too, he's been gone for a bit of time and I think he's out for another week. We'll see if he comes back and if he really tries to drum up public support, because that could have been a big factor in the healthcare bills not getting passed. So we'll see what he does. But the president has a lot of public appearances. This shows Obama throwing in the first pitch of a game. It's a great PR moment for presidents to do this. When presidents have, foreign royalty or foreign leadership come and visit, the president holds dinner for those people as well. So there's a lot of these ceremonial functions kind of as head of state that the president does that really kind of gets the public's attention and looks favorably upon the White House. One of the things, and I don't have this on here, but one of the biggest powers that the president has is the bully pulpit. And so that's kind of what I was talking about with some people say, the need for President Trump to go out and really start talking about this new tax policy and promoting the tax policy, the Republican policy, and saying, this is what we need, people, this is great. It will get his base energized. It might get people on the fringes to come on board with it and then write to their congressmen and women and say, yes, we want this. But that bully pulpit is a really powerful tool that the president has that no one in Congress necessarily has. Another thing that presidents look to are their approval ratings. And so these vary, as you can see, depending upon the point in which the polls are taken. So at, this shows George W. Bush at 32% approval rating when he left office. And so that was super low, but you better believe after 9/11, his approval rating was through the roof. It was really, really high. So these really kind of vary, from point to point. And President Trump, it's kind of interesting to look at his polling. His polling seems to be relatively high among Republicans. Nationally, it seems to be really low. His office, of course, says that the polling data is fake news and that it's not correct. So you really do have to make sure that you're going to a reputable polling service and looking at polls like Gallup polls that are tried and true and tested and seem to have reliable results. But approval ratings really do affect a president. So if, Trump came out and said something and all of a sudden he noticed that his approval rating really dropped, you better believe he's going to change his tune or reformat things a little bit to get those approval ratings up, because really that's the saving grace for a president, are those high approval ratings. One of the skills that a president needs to have is legislative skills. And so this is to get the policies that the president campaigned on passed, so that when the president is running for a second term, perhaps, or trying to get someone of the same party into office, if the president has fulfilled 2 terms, they can point to their legislative achievements and say, look what we've done. So there's a variety of forms, from bargaining to making personal appeals, consulting with Congress. LBJ was really great at getting his legislative agenda passed because, as we all know, he was very intimidating in the Senate and had a lot of power. And so when he became president, he used those skills and he had a little black book that he kept on everyone in Congress, and he knew the dirt on everyone. And so he could really go and kind of twist them and get them to vote his way. But really bargaining with Congress is the most important thing. And it's interesting to see some of the tactics that President Trump takes. He often is ripping on Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan in his tweets and not very nice to them. But yet he needs them to get policies passed. There's a honeymoon period that the president has within the first year in which the president really needs to get information or really needs to get legislation passed ASAP. And we'll see if President Trump is able to do that. Lame duck is when the president either is not running for a second term or has already run 2 terms and can't run again. And so it's that idea that Congress is going to kind of ignore the president, in particular if they're a different party, and not let anything happen because the president's a lame duck. The president has essentially no power anymore because he or she is not going to be there for another term. So that's it for the second lecture. We will fill in the gaps with some additional information in class. Thanks, guys.